Okay. Hi everybody. For the second talk today, Nina, Jaun and Dimitri Reist, who are two members of the collective nccfn, have invited Kim Hou, who's the co-founder and creative director of a French brand, I guess, about a worker.
French, kind of, yes. Yeah. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. So thanks for coming, and perhaps to start, if you could tell us about nccfn, and then Kim, you can tell us a little bit about a worker.
Yeah, so we're both a network, kind of. Of course, a label, a fashion label, that's why our stuff is represented here, but also a network of designers, artisans, craft workers, and as well even our protagonists who are on the pictures are actually part of that group. So the network itself can always be fluid, and of course there's a core group, but as well it always depends on the project, like growing or changing within our different disciplines and expertises. Like I'm a tailor and a fashion designer.
Yeah, and I'm a trained graphic designer, and we have also photographers and other tailors. So at the end, we kind of come together and put our expertises kind of into needs, and then also cross over. So we have then this kind of interdisciplinary learning process from each other. So Nina does not only do the tailoring or comes from the fashion, but also this other stuff and so on and so on. So we kind of mix stuff together.
And nccfn, what does that mean?
So it's short for nothing can come from nothing, but actually it's also just a name which allows to guess what we are, because it keeps the idea open that we could also be like a train company or any kind of shady company which has a shady name. So,
it's maybe interesting to kind of like thinking of the talk we had before, where both protagonists had like the company was with kind of branded with their own name, which is also very interesting. And I think we kind of do the opposite, where we kind of want to take away the authorship of certain protagonists, but rather keep it a bit, let's say, unclear who is actually really doing what. So we kind of can also grow and fast without like having one person that is in front of everyone. So that's also why we shift. Now it's me and Nina here, but it could also be two other persons from the group. So I think we also play a little bit with this kind of idea of this group that kind of is unclear who is involved and who not.
Okay.
So how many people are you in your group?
So there is for sure a core group which works now since a long time together, which is, for example, Thibaut, the textile designer and screen printer as well, who produces a lot. Some tailors. There is Nura, who is originally a tailor as well, but got into production design, so visualization and more in a digital way. Like the output of our work as well is not only the collections, like every designer you got to show your stuff in the form of pictures or videos. And of course like Flo, the photographer, and yeah.
And you were saying earlier you're not all based in the same physical city, is that right? You're spread out in different places?
Yeah, so I mean, the idea of being local is really nice to can represent and burn in the capital of Switzerland, where we got like a tailor studio and a textile screen print studio. But at the same time we're also very global. So of course, like Dimitri lives in Brussels and other craft workers, etc. are from different places. And for us it's super important to can work with people from everywhere, as the people in Switzerland are also from everywhere. So yeah, to open up the idea of how we get on in the global fashion industry in general and
Yeah.
how we want to work within. Yeah.
We call ourselves a multi-local group, right? That is kind of what we say.
Great. And Kim, about a worker.
Okay, so hi everyone. So I'm Kim and I'm the co-founder of About a Worker. It's a project I started with the idea of giving workers a voice in the fashion industry. So, well, as we know today, like the fashion world is super spread out, extremely globalized, but really hierarchical. And what happened over the years is that we've had an industry where we started like, giving orders to people in especially emerging countries where most of the factories are today. And today we're at a time where, of course, there's global warming, there's a natural social crisis going on with the work as well. But in order to like repair this, I think we need a dialogue. And I believe as like a trained design student, well, I started this project when I was a design student, I realized that design could be used not only to create pretty clothes or pretty stuff, but could be used as an actual universal language, where through shapes, colors, textures, and why not like fashion collection, you would be able to actually express an idea or story and create a statement through like an engaging product. And so how I started About a Worker was really by going inside some factories, some garment factories, and then instead of asking workers to produce clothes, I would actually give them a sort of design initiation with different exercises and giving them the possibility to express themselves and create their own collection actually. Most of the time they would deconstruct and reconstruct a uniform. So for example, for our first collection in Saint-Denis, we worked with refugees who happened to work in a garment factory, and they all were able to embellish a blue uniform, which is like the French symbol of the factory worker, in order to express how they arrived within the fashion industry, but also how they arrived in France and what was their background. Then after this first collection, we went to Venice inside of a prison for 3 months, where we worked with prisoners who are also couture makers. We worked just before COVID with sweatshop workers in China, like former sweatshop workers, and we stayed like in a workers' village out there. We also worked with some brands such as La Redoute, which is kind of like the equivalent of ASOS in France, I would say. And we work with logistic workers who all collectively created a collection with the pattern maker from La Redoute, the creative director of La Redoute, and that was the first time within 30 years of working life out there that they were able to actually meet people in the creative world as well. And now it's been 7 years that we have About a Worker with my co-founder Paul Boogert, and so we are hosting a lot of public workshops within cultural institutions, but also within shops where we are trying and aiming to bring new values in the fashion industry. So we do a lot of upcycling workshops. We do a lot of workshops also where we involve craftsmen to teach their skills. And we do a lot of research too. So that's like kind of the third side of About a Worker. So recently we've been financed by the Ministry of Culture to do a whole research about relocalization in the north of France. And we sort of, after interviewing many workers and creating 15 documentaries, which are on our YouTube channel today,
Okay, cool.
we went inside some linen factory, some lace factory, all based in like the Hauts-de-France. We've met some young designers, and there is like such a beautiful energy going on there. We decided with the locals to imagine a new fashion system where instead of buying, you would be actually creating your own clothes and learning how to create your own clothes with factory workers. And so this project is actually kind of maybe a certain branch of the future of About a Worker, where we want to replicate this model in different countries, in different regions, to actually showcase the values of the local culture as well on an international level. Yeah.
Okay. Wow, there's a lot to
It's a lot.
process. Yeah. I don't know if you'd rather ask Kim a question, but what came to my mind then was perhaps it would be interesting for you to talk about the collection that you're selling here and perhaps that process of that project of producing that collection.
Yeah, I guess how I understood is as well that you are basically working with already existing garments as well, and that's something we have in common. And this collection here is made out of an overproduction or failures of the Swiss or Bern football company or group. So their sponsor is Nike, and yeah, they did a failure in sizing because they switched the production place to a new country where the sizing is just different, or the sizing of the factory. And yeah, all those thousands of pieces, they arrived in Bern, Switzerland, and then they finally realized that it has a big mistake in the shape, so they couldn't sell it, and also it's for the players, so they reached out to us because we just started in a quite natural way to work with existing, because it's just a lot around.
How do you feel about working for Nike? I think we talked, because we had a discussion on the phone a couple of months ago, and we talked about the idea of working with big brands. So I think it would be really nice to have your input on how you feel about working with brands like Nike, who are so criticized by the fashion world, but who are also really innovative in their way of doing.
Yeah, so I think it's super interesting for us in general, instead of only being able to sustain ourselves by just doing these collabs with leftovers, and we are kind of a sweet little solution to can just go on with all that stuff which is overproduced or whatever left over, then to think about the material itself, how we could lower it in general, or I mean, it's not our goal to just move on like this as a business concept. It's just the reality, but actually it would be nice if the reality would change and there would be less leftovers, overproductions and failures. So of course it's a political thing, and as well it's also a nice example with young boys. This is the football team of Bern. I mean, Nike is their sponsor and they do the orders, and they're not a fashion company and don't have to do actually in general anything with clothes. So it's quite interesting to work then with those companies who are just between, like a fashion company which is that big and us.
I guess it was also like in this particular case it was also about relationships, because we knew some Jaun is also in the audience. He was working for the young boys and he kind of knew us, so it's also like, I guess through our work before we kind of got like already a bit known for this kind of way of producing, of working, and I think through that, this kind of to the personal relation, it's very different than if you get like a email from I would say some salesman from a big company, which is very like anonymous maybe. And I think also through that we started also to see there is a local chance to build a relationship that maybe can last. In this sense, I think through this first collection that we showcase here, there is an opportunity to have this kind of partnership that maybe sometimes a bit more, sometimes less, is always kind of lasting, and then of course it becomes maybe something more sustainable because the leftovers will keep on coming sometimes, hopefully not too much, but through the relationship we really have also an agency to maybe plant some values and ideas and also some kind of ways of thinking into this kind of companies that then one can also maybe share with others, like for example, we just heard that the young boys had a contact with Paris Saint-Germain, which is the club here, so there is an exchange, and of course if we can have a little say in this kind of world, specifically for football, not that we care so much only about football, but these are global companies, when we can implant a little bit of a value, then maybe it makes actually an impact into a more global system.
Absolutely, and I think it makes an impact also like in different branch of our society as well, especially like for example the young generation, which is going to be triggered by upcycling or by new ways of making, but through their interest as well. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think usually the most valuable is like the relationship you get with the other people who are on the other side, to understand each other, how they work, how we work, and yeah.
Yeah, because maybe just to finish on that question, when we worked with Adidas, it was quite the opposite somehow, because they just planted money and there was no real intention to really work with us in a way that we would say, okay, there is a actual interest to share knowledge about how we could change things. They were just using it as a, let's say, an anniversary or a jubilee moment where they could kind of say, oh, we work with cool upcycling brands. And this was also a learning process for us, how to detect this, to see when is it like sincere, when it doesn't make sense to really engage, and when should we pull out. And I think this for us is quite exciting to also learn more about and yeah.
So it's really funny because you just mentioned Adidas, and I think I really had like a kind of opposite experience, which was really questionable. We've done a workshop with Adidas a couple of years ago where they gave us all of their clothes afterwards, and we're invited to do a workshop at Stadium, which is kind of like the streetwear mall, like the famous streetwear mall in Paris. And basically, they gave us all of their clothes leftovers, or clothes with defaults, and they told us like to create and imagine like an upcycling workshop. And so what we decided to do was to give the participants, the potential participants of Stadium, the ability to create their own bucket hat or their own fanny pack for free with all of their leftovers, and Adidas agreed. And so within 2 weeks, we had like more than thousands of people coming in the shop, which was pretty insane. We didn't think that would happen. And so when the participant would come in, he would choose a clothes, start like the first like kind of step of producing a piece of clothes, which is like cutting and using our pattern to cut. And then we would have a team of 4 workers who would be actually creating the bucket hat or the fanny pack on site. And what is really interesting is that now Adidas saw it not only as like a sort of communication event, but also an inspiring system which can enter within their own like actual system. And I think this is kind of the impact that like small brand can have like on bigger brand, is like to actually collaborate in order to, even if it has to be like a small amount of time and a small amount of percentage within the company, but you have this ability to actually transform what's going on within the inside, even on a small level, and if it has to take time in some ways.
Yeah. It's just always trying, or we always try to balance as well, or like to choose right with our intuition, what are the right like collaborations or relationships we really want to do.
Because I imagine today most brands, sorry to interrupt, but many big brands are all looking to present an image as if they're engaged in environmental concerns, and how much would collaborations just feel like greenwashing? I imagine you could feel instrumentalized in a kind of artificial and insincere.
Yeah, and the question of how much they use us.
Yes, you use them.
Yeah, so
I think it's a collaboration in some ways. Of course, of course it is for them a sort of greenwashing event, let's be honest, but for us it's also, I don't know for you guys, but for us it's also a way to be able to actually bring our values to big brands and kind of be like, oh, we're transforming the system, fuck the system in some ways. and when it's working, like what's quite beautiful is that there is not this hating feeling anymore, and there is more this, okay, we can actually transform things and be positive about it. It's just a matter of time. And what we have to think about is also that company like Adidas or Nike or even brands like H&M, etc., are like huge companies which involve so many people worldwide. And how can you have like a huge impact when you have so many people involved? And what happened during like COVID time, for example, is that big brands had to cancel on their orders. And for example, in factories in Bangladesh, so many people lost their jobs. And what we have to think about is that 90% of the workers in Bangladesh are women. When they quit their job, they don't really have any other possibilities. Another possibilities which is so terrible for them is of course that there is unfortunately prostitution involved in Bangladesh as well. And what happened during the COVID time is that a lot of women, 100,000 women lost their jobs and had to actually sometimes leave their home as well, because unfortunately forced marriage is also something going on out there. So how can you actually, I think the big question is not like how can you completely erase fast fashion, but how can you transform it and move forward for the workers also involved, and try to like implement new rules for the workers to be a benefit for them in some ways.
I mean, worker, I don't know in English if it's a stronger word, I think it is, but in French, you know, ouvrier, like it's a word that is so resonant in political discourse and history and Marxist theory. And I mean, how much, when you were thinking through your project and naming it, and how much was it, what were the ideas in your heads, what were you trying to build?
I think that the idea was to value the craftsmen of this 21st century, which I believe are the workers of today in some ways, but it's also, I think it's also like, of course, it highlights the hierarchy which exists in the fashion world today, but instead of like we're highlighting the beauty of like what the workers can bring on the table, so that's why it's called About a Worker in some ways. So.
And are your intentions to produce things or to produce clothes, or it's more is that the intention?
So we actually do sell some clothes, but it's 5% of our business in some ways. What I think we try to intend the most is like transform the process going on in the fashion industry. So talking about like our clothes, we do have a workwear line which is available on our website, which is fully made in France in our factory in Calais. In Roubaix, sorry. We used to work in Calais, that's why, but now we are working with like an amazing group of former tailors who are now like workers inside of a factory in Roubaix, so in the north of France. And basically, like, yes, we do have like a collection of clothes, but we also produce clothes for other companies, derived product. For example, recently we worked with le 19M, which is the Chanel Foundation, and they asked us to produce 10,000 tote bags with only Chanel fabric leftovers, or Atelier des Matières leftovers, which is kind of their upcycling branch within their company. And so, like we produce them in our workshops. So like, for example, our studio in Paris is kind of our laboratory, and so we produce prototypes up there for companies, and then we send them to our factory in France. And what's quite cool is that we have this possibility to actually transform what's going on in the industry, because we're always asking our client to reuse their old dead stocks, and so we can make things from them. But like, yes, we do have a clothing line, and it's available online, but it's more like a sort of facade to our way of thinking and our values in some ways.
Okay.
I mean, somehow it's interesting because also I think it's like a sentence that we have been working on quite a lot, but I think we also use the fashion industry mostly to kind of put our values into some kind of way where people can receive it. Mm-hmm. And I think like what is super interesting, of course, clothes is really something that is, it's in a sense a very democratic thing. Everyone uses clothes, and it travels also quite a lot. So we think about that a lot, how to use it in a way that it actually really share some values, even if you wear it, but then also maybe there are some informations on it that we provide in the hang tags or in the wash tags.
So like a messenger.
I think so. Sometimes we really try to hijack the vehicle of a fabric or of a cloth to share our thoughts, because this 4 panels that we have here is a bit like the way we try to think where we stand, like. With these words that kind of like oppose each other all the time, where we stand, are we standing in the middle, or where are we standing, and also acknowledging that we kind of in it, and not just outside and criticizing it. Mm-hmm. So how to kind of put these ideas into maybe then a collaboration with a bigger brand, or even with a smaller brand, how to implement it into clothes that we tailor, and so on and so on. I think I really resonate what you're saying. It's a really interesting way of thinking about fashion to understand that it travels quite a lot, and that everyone is wearing it as well.
But it's also, I think, what's, I don't know for you guys, but like I didn't start About a Worker with the idea of selling clothes. I started About a Worker with the idea of expressing people, like the unheard voices of the fashion industry feelings and giving them the opportunity that I had actually as a student to be creative. And, you know, it's something really elitist also to be creative. Not everyone today can go to like an art or design school or be an artist. And I think through creativity, like you do have this feeling, this opportunity to connect, but it's not given to everyone. So I think it's more like About the Worker started not as like a business which wanted to sell clothes, but more as a company which wanted to create link between people.
And how do, so you know, the different, I'm sure you've met many different workers in different environments and situations, but how do they, you know, what have has your experience been? I mean, are these people receptive, or they, you know, like?
It's so funny because at first, so for example, for our workers collab, at first, like most of the time, the workers are a little bit like, what am I going to do? I'm going to take pictures of my environment, to create a mood board. I'm going to draw. I haven't drawn since I was 3 years old. And actually, the more they get into the process, the more intrigued they are and the more involved they are. And then when it comes to the prototype phase, most of the time they're super proud about revealing their stories, about showcasing also their craft, and about also being able to create their own piece and feel a little bit like Karl Lagerfeld in some ways. So, so yeah, I think there is a lot of proudness to it, but also what we do is, okay, so we have this design initiation, which is kind of a method I've created, but at the same time, like I'm always trying to adapt it to the current problematics of a context, of a specific context. That's why the research part is really important before actually starting like a worker collaboration. This is a reason why I say, like, for example, 3 months in Venice, 1.5 months in China, to be able to actually explore the surrounding of the workers before being truly involved with them. But it's so funny how, like, from one collaboration to the others, you do always have different contexts and different ways of working. For example, when we were in China, we collaborated with 5 women who were former sweatshop workers, and we all asked them to create their own piece of clothes and to embellish their own uniform. But they actually all helped each other to make it, which was really different from the collections we've done with other workers in in Occidental countries, in Western countries, yeah, and where suddenly like you feel that everyone wants to be like, I want to be the best, and then finally understanding the group values. But yeah.
Yeah, and it's also about what the industry did with this rationalization and within this huge scale and this globalization, of course, is like just the separation and segregation of all those different tasks. I mean,
Poubelle.
yeah, we also felt, of course, we're not only designers, we're tailors and craft workers as well. So for us it was really also about, or it is about, like, you can work interdisciplinary with each other, and by working with this already existing garments, it's also quite necessary in the design process that the tailoring, for example,
of course,
the printing and this designing, everything is like quite a fluid process and not separated in those like conventional fields.
Yeah.
No, but it's also like what you're talking about with upcycling and using old garments to create new, and it asks for so much craft, and because you need to have this logic of a tailor to be able to actually design a great piece of clothes otherwise, and which is easy to make also, or like quite easy to make, but yeah, like it asks for I think a bigger task than just knowing how to draw in some ways.
And for us it's that, yeah, that's why it's also interesting for us not to do like this super unique pieces or limited pieces. I mean, our amount of pieces we put out depends on the material we get. So we received quite a lot of those football shirts, and that's why we could do like bigger amounts. But it's also interesting to show the industry or that you can actually do it in a bigger scale, reuse it and deconstruct it, and by that we are again within this local global topic, because in the end it's also nice to work with studios which are based in India, for example, where the leftovers of the West are arriving. I mean, the material is just around, who can really like specialize their studios or their small factory in reusing stuff, so that it can be placed within the industry. And that's why it's important for us to act globally as well, or to interact.
Absolutely.
I mean, also this is again a relationship that especially you build up, because you were there, you went to the site, you saw it, and I think it's again like very important to be at the place to also really understand how it works. And then, if you build the relationship, I also agree. Kind of, it's not so. For maybe it's a bold statement, but for us, it's not so important to say it's all locally Swiss made. But we really see the local also in somewhere else, because of course, if we can't deny that there's in other places also things happening, and maybe it's better to have an impact there, or to work very local in a far away sense. So, for example, at the moment we're doing like with a theater in Zurich. We're working for a Jubilee shirt, and we produce these shirts from leftovers in India. They ship it to us, and we print it then in Switzerland. So I think this is something that we are very interested in as well. But very important is not just to order it online, but really have the knowledge about what is happening, and really have the contact, and also understand their values of working, of course, and also see how they like to work and how they can produce, and not just put the Western standards on their agenda, let's say.
And what I think it's also, for a long time we've produced clothes elsewhere just for money purposes, when all of any countries actually have their own craft, and we completely forgot about them. And I think today, like, we need to be aware and educate our society to actually know that this craft comes from this country, this one comes from that, this field of linen comes from this part of the world, and I think we kind of our role also as people in the fashion industry, I think, is also to acknowledge the beauty of each craft in each country, rather than copying them to produce for cheaper in some ways. So.
Exactly. This is a whole topic for itself. To like, especially like the big brands got criticized a lot by just like appropriate crafts and its visual, and then producing it wherever we don't know. And of course, I think it's important to be open for that global relationships in a smaller way, that it can happen like honestly and respectful. I think it's really about the amount, and that's the thing again with like this greenwashing. I mean, of course, if we work with a huge brand like Adidas, or if we represent Nike, of course we are kind of greenwashing and they are using us, but at the same time what we do in our scale, which is realistic because we are not that big, and it is still true and real and has this impact it can have in that scale. So it has a small impact compared to a huge company who does huge shit.
Yeah, and this is a reason why if you stay in your little corner as a young designer, well, it's not working, because you won't have an audience which follows you as well. So.
And it's also the question for us always, like business-wise, or how you want to get on. It's like how much we want to grow as well. And
I mean, also, I think what I think is really important is also to share with other practices like we do today, to learn from maybe similar practice, how they do it maybe in different stages of their career. I think it was super interesting to see on your website. You're very also, I think you very elaborate already what you're doing. I think we're still searching on words sometimes, or at least it was inspiring.
Still searching for words too.
But I think what I mean is also what you say, like through our work and through the consistency that we stay on this kind of craft or way of working, we also reach out or get to know other people who do the same, and then you empower each other, right?
Yeah.
Because we just at the moment are in contact with a South African designer who co-runs a brand called Mami Wata, and they're very strongly engaged in trying to put forward like local African design, so really make the design from there and not so much like having this kind of Western view on how African design should look like, or how especially African craftsmen design for the Western world. So it's this really empowering brand, but they have an issue because almost nobody in South Africa knows how to tailor, because all the schools were abolished or abandoned. So he reached out to us to see if we can maybe find a way of collaborating together or learn from each other, to set up workshops where they then maybe can tailor locally, and we can maybe then also learn from them how they produce, and we can take it to us. And I think this is kind of a dream way of how things can evolve, that you really start to connect with people who have then also other needs, and you can help them, and then you grow as a network, and then it hopefully gets stronger, established at one point.
Yeah, and I think it's and that's kind of the beauty of our century, is that we can connect so easily, also through social network, through life in general, and it's really great that now I feel that for a long time, like fashion relationship, like when you were a designer, you were really by yourself, and I feel today like this idea of being a collective and acting like a community, whether you're big or you're small, is actually kind of what's going to transform the industry too. And I can see it, for example, in Paris and in France. Like now you have, for example, this network online for French-based companies called Fashion Green Hub, and basically it's a sort of network which involves like the biggest company, the fashion and textile companies in France, but also ethical fashion designers, and they organize conferences and networking sessions, and they have like an online group as well where you can ask for questions, for collaborations, for materials, and they really helped us out actually over this last couple of years. So I think it's wonderful to also feel part of a community and not feel by yourself.
I mean, like our network, how we just like happened to be, was also the reason to be like more autonomous in what we are doing in general, because no one of us just wanted to go on